When I remember Nigeria, water run away my yo. I want to see if we have comrades here. When I remember Nigeria, water run away my yo. Aye, water run away my. When I remember kidnapping, water run away my yo. When I remember poverty, water run away my yo. Great Nigerian people, are you here? I think we've had a very fantastic time through the course of this particular summit. Nothing can be greater than this. Nothing can be better than this. I probably just have 4 pointers to drop very quickly before I take my seat. I'm just coming from the court because I know that I won the last municipal area council elections. And if you're not excited, it means that you don't even know why you're here in the first place. I ran for the election not because I was trying to run for a local government election. My profile and pedigree probably outweighs anybody who has been president of this country, and I say that without ego or pride. I've been across the world, I've gone to schools, I've been in places, and I understand the nitty-gritty. I understand what it means, I understand what Nigeria is. And I say to every young person here today that the people who gave us Nigeria were all young people. The oldest of them was Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, and he was between 39 and 40. Both Ahmadu Bello and Awolowo were all down in their 30s. As a matter of fact, we know that all the military rulers were in their 20s. And I say this because the power of the people is greater than the power of politics. The power of the people is greater than the power of the people in government. Nigeria will not change by political slogans. Nigeria is not going to change by propaganda. Nigeria is not going to change by some elite consensus. Nigeria is going to change when ordinary people like me, people when they speak, people do not give accolades to, people do not even understand. Ordinary people like the market woman, like the market girls, like my brother that is sitting in the wheelchair, like the PDW, like those people who are ordinary citizens who people do not take cognizance of. My respect for this gathering today has to do with the fact that it is about ordinary people. The Kwankwasiyyas are here because they've made up their mind. In spite of Kwankwaso, they've said that it is about them, not about the leaders. The Obedience have said that it is about the obedience, even in spite of Obi. And I know that the people listening to me are not much because a lot of us are carried away by passion and emotion. Passion and emotion is good, but it's not good enough. The people who delivered the most brutal of lifelong legacies of movement across the world are people who are not just moved by just emotions. They are moved by the dignity of the value that they know that they carry. "2027, if we are going to clinch power, is not going to be by showmanship. It's going to come from the residue of people who within themselves have the power to regenerate like the sun." I'm not here to motivate you. I'm not here to impress you. People who have gone beyond impression. Nigeria needs saving. Our political class, they need saving. Peter Kwankwaso, they need saving. Nigerian people need saving. They can only be saved by people who do not need inspiration and motivation. They can only be saved by a people who are like the sun. Rana, do you understand what I'm saying? Not like the moon. The moon gets its reflection when other substances and substances reflect and bounces on it. The sun has the power to regenerate its own passion and its own inspiration. The sun has the power. The sun has been rising and rising since the day your grandfather was born. The sun is not tired because the sun does not need anybody or anything to motivate her. Do I have people who are like the sun here? People who are true leaders, who, when the whole world is going left, they can go. I'm not talking about influencers. I'm not talking about social media. I'm talking about a people who are grounded in their value as a people. People, when the whole world is going this way, they will keep going alone until the whole world will follow them. Everything that exists in this life were built by a people who are like the sun, who by themselves are not carried by emotions or passion. Our unity must go beyond tribe. It must go beyond religion. It must go beyond region. The people who divide us, they do that destroying our beautiful values. Look at us as Nigerians. Muslims, Islam, beautiful. Christianity, Christians, beautiful. Those who do not believe in God, beautiful people. Are we not? Those who want to divide us, they take our beautiful religion. They take those tools, our population as a people. This is the beautiful values that we have. But when we have leaders who all they see is take advantage of the youthful population, they see imaginations of tools that they will use during elections to divide us, to use them as tools, but never empower them. We have to go beyond recycling of what? Selfishness and leaders who have egos, who are not building successors and people. Do not follow people who do not want to build legacies. Do not follow people who are all about themselves. Follow people who are about the ordinary people. And that's why I'm here to say to us that grassroots mobilization is the foundation for eternal legacies that can change everything for us. And it comes from ordinary people, not from presidents, not from doctorate, not from high-profile leaders, but from ordinary people. Everything in life that has given birth to something that has become greater comes from ordinary people, market women. The discussions must go to the churches, to the mosques, to the beer parlors, until they hit the streets. Nothing is going to change until we're able to build a residue of strength, of resilience, people who are not looking back, who can stay focused regardless of where the people are going, remaining consistent. Not people who just want to take advantage of platforms, of seasons. Because today in Nigeria, our value systems have become so broken. Many people are just looking for opportunities. If you're here today, if you're offered 1 billion, if you're offered houses and cars, are you still going to stand on the pedigree of what you're claiming that you're holding on to? When they come for you, because I say this because it is not about the day of speeches. It is about when the real deal hits the ground. Is somebody listening to me? When all the euphorias, when all the applauses are gone, that is when the real deal happens. What happens behind the closed doors? No, I can tell you something. I can tell you 1 or 2 things before I go. I run elections here, and they will always send people to you. Do not kid yourself. If somebody who hasn't seen 10 million, suddenly 100 million hits your account, some of the madness that we are seeing, somebody who has not seen 50 million in his life, and 2 billion suddenly hits his account, say, Yebara Hoka, madness sets in. This is the crux of the matter, because at the end of the day, when we speak about one voice and one vision, and we say in unity we stand, our unity must go beyond the parochial tools that they've used to divide us each and every time. This is the crux of the matter. And as I leave you, I want to tell you something. A new Nigeria is possible, but it's never going to happen without sacrifice. A new Nigeria is possible, but it's not going to happen without courage. A new Nigeria is possible, but it's never going to happen without moral leadership. Sacrifice to forgo your selfish ambition. Sacrifice to build the next generation beyond yourself. Sacrifice to put money behind people who are running for local government. Put money behind councillors. Put money behind governors. Put money behind people who are running for House of Reps. Put money behind senators. People that you do not know. People that you can see the criteria of competence. You can see compassion. You can see credibility. When you find such individuals and you can put resources behind them, this is the sacrifice that I speak about. Courage to speak the truth regardless of the times and the season. If Wike calls you, if Tinubu calls you, do you have the courage to stand when the dollars are rolling? It is not about speeches. You know, before you run on this, some people are only complaining because they have no millions in their accounts. Some people are only complaining because they're not sitting in offices, because the opportunity to even bribe or to take those things are not there. Would you have the courage to stand when the chips are down? Because 2027, they're going to roll out all the billions. We have seen in our lifetimes people who spoke about this government unbelievable things. It's almost as if you're asking yourself, am I truly alive? When the Bwalas and the Rhinos of this world, who have told us how criminal a gang these particular regimes are, but today they are lining themselves and walking. If you have to die a poor man for the rest of your life, even if you have the opportunity, will you have the courage to stand? These are the things that will bring to us a new Nigeria. And so I say to you today, stand if you know that will be okay. Take a stand today.
Because Nigeria will not be open from this time. As the night is